All right, guys, we're in for a real impromptu session. We're definitely winging it. I think all of us on stage, like the groups just met. I put together the questions this morning on my Marriott cards. So anything you don't want to answer, guys, just pivot, right? So for anyone here who doesn't know who I am, my name is Negin Oliver. I lead our data center GPU business development team at AMD. Today, I am very focused on our NeoCloud data center and AI startups to try and build that part of the business. And we have an incredible panel for you guys. And I'm actually really excited. Our team pulled together a good cross-section. So let me tell you a little bit about our panelists, and then we'll get right into it. So Anush Elangovan here is also part of AMD. And he hasn't been with us that long. It's been a few years, but he is definitely in my top 10. His excitement for developers and to get us to be world-class has been contagious, I guess we'll call it. And he has like a fan following, like literally, on Twitter. So if you don't follow him, you should. He's really exciting. Now, what Anush brings to us, he came to us through an acquisition of Nod.ai, and he leads our ROCm software strategy and team. And so his experience of being a founder makes him a perfect fit here because he owns it from the AMD side, but he comes from that world. And prior to that, he worked at Google working on Chrome. So extremely relevant experience making software easy for our users. Next up, we've got Anjay Mehta. I can't do justice of introducing him here. He is the CEO and founder of AMP PBC. Prior to that, he was a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, and he led a lot of their frontier AI investments and also their Oxygen program where they got infrastructure for their portfolio accounts. He holds plenty of board seats as really credible companies, was one of the founding investors in Anthropic, as well as others. And part of his portfolio is AMD. Luma AI is a big customer of ours. You can see them out on the floor there. So he's got a good cross-section of experience that's relevant for our audience here, and we're excited to have him. Mohammed Norouzi is the CEO and founder of Ideogram, and it's a really exciting startup that AMD's been working with. And they are really renowned for their text rendering in images, really amazing quality. He was originally a competitive AI programmer, but has turned into really research and AI side of things, brings a strong background from Google Brain, and a lot of citations and credibility in the market that I can't even possibly give credit for. So hopefully he's going to expand on that a little bit today. And last but not least, Oliver Cameron, who is the co-founder and CEO of Odyssey. I told him earlier today, I am most excited about having him here because my son's name is Cameron Oliver, and I'm like, this is a good omen. So we're excited to have him here. He has over a decade of experience working on self-driving cars, and has been sort of part of the startup starting companies and leading product teams focused on a lot of this physical AI side. So I think he's going to bring a new perspective around world models for us here today. So, okay, to get started, I'm going to skip you, Anush, and I'm going to go to our guest speakers. I'd like you guys to start by telling me just a little bit about your company and what brought you to AMD. So how did you become part of the AMD family?
Sure.
Yeah, you go first. We'll go in order, Anj.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me and us here. I don't know why you're skipping Anush. I have so many questions for Anush.
I have a question for him at the end. Don't worry, we'll come back.
I'll tell you about my company, AMD.
Yeah. Well, you might not remember this, but I think I just realized reading your bio that I think we may have met when you were working on Nod.
Yes.
Was your office in Mountain View?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so for those of you who are hardware geeks should look up Nod. Anush's company was extraordinary. It was one of the first wearable...
Yeah, we built a smart ring.
Yeah, the ring.
Yes, we built a smart ring, and back then in 2014, Andrew gave us the best AI startup award when people were like, why is this ring an AI company? But because of all the algorithms we had back then in 2014, it was all put in like a small little microcontroller, and we were doing it in edge AI, if you will, on on a controller. Yeah.
Yeah, so you should definitely ask Anush all kinds of questions.
Oh, I got some
but-
questions for him, don't worry.
But I'm happy to, so to segue into AMP, we're a public benefit corporation. We've got two businesses. We have an investment business where we invest in venture capital. It's a venture capital firm where we invest in early stage startups, we incubate them. We focus primarily on frontier AI, and so we try to partner with researchers and scientists who are really pushing the capabilities in whatever domain they're passionate about. I've had the chance over the last few years to partner with some great scientists, including Mohammed, who had the privilege to be a small angel investor in many years ago. When Mohammed was spinning out of Google, and Mohammed's an inspiration to me, and I love being able to help scientists and engineers who are trying to commercialize their research. So that first part of our business is the foundry, where we invest and incubate in frontier AI teams. And then we've got an infrastructure arm that is building what we call the grid. The grid is trying to do for compute what electricity grids do for electricity, which is we pool capacity both on the supply side and the demand side. We have sort of a platform that allows us to drive up utilization of compute and then make sure that independent teams have access to the compute they need in a flexible way. Our engineering team sort of came from Google, actually working on an internal system there called the Borg, XBorg, and GQM scheduler, which sort of handled orchestration across various different compute workloads for Google's internal teams, and drove up utilization from 66-ish% 5 years ago to 99% before they left to join AMP. And so our goal is to really try and ensure that independent developers and teams who might not have the privilege of being inside large organizations like Google, the hyperscalers, can still access the compute they need in a flexible way. And we got it's been a privilege to be able to work with AMD over the last few years. I'm on the board of a company called Luma, and they train video models, and AMD was an extraordinary partner to them a couple of years ago. I think a meaningful amount of the company's inference now happens on AMD. And so that became a kind of proof point to us early on that AMD was just a great partner to early stage startups. Their needs are often, many of you are, actually quick show of hands, how many folks here are startup founders and developers? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so as you guys know, in the early days, you just need a lot of flexibility, and AMD was the culture of AMD of being very service oriented allowed us to deepen our partnership now, where several now of both our portfolio companies and parts of the grid utilize AMD technology. So anyway, thank you for being such a great partner to our teams and developers in general.
Awesome, thank you. Mohammed?
And I can confirm that, starting from our AMD partnership as well, Anush, Negin, and the whole AMD team have been super collaborative. And when we were launching our new model, we had some issues, and I think their engineers were up at night and trying to help us debug all the final issues. And it's been incredible to have them as part of our journey. The company at large, Anj was an early investor in us. We came from Google, having developed image models there, and we had this vision that the whole creative industry will transform, and we're going to see design, marketing, advertising be built on top of generative media, and image generation, editing, and design is a core component of that. And if you haven't noticed, as part of Lisa's keynote, we had many AI-generated images at almost all of the slides. So this is happening, and we think the next inflection point is having custom AI models for each brand. And our vision is we're going to have branding done through AI models. So you're not going to deal with a brand guidelines anymore. The PDF document that outlines how the logo should be used, how typography should be used, and what types of colors should be used as part of the brand. That's going to go away, and you're going to deal with AI agents with custom AI models that understand your brand DNA and help across various platforms for storytelling, for marketing and design. And this is already happening for us with a few brands. that they use the model to design new concepts for footwear, for other types of products. And it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of creativity, because you want to design creative concepts, but it's also connected to the brand uniqueness. And the customization helps you keep it on brand, keep the brand DNA, and extend that and move that forward through the evolution of the brand and the evolution of society. And now we are seeing AI agents creating an enormous amount of code. New products are being built very quickly and efficiently and coming to the market. And the missing piece is the differentiation of how can you make your brand stand out and be differentiated from our brands. And Ideogram wants to be the enabler of differentiation. So your visual communication is unique and your brand is unique, but you can also scale it very easily through agents again.
Awesome. Thank you. I didn't even know that Anush and Ideogram were connected, so that's fascinating. And I think you hit on, it's not always going to be easy. You guys are doing really hard things, but the one thing AMD is committed to doing is being in there with you. So that's kind of part of our DNA as a company.
Yeah, thanks so much,
Thank you.
Lauren.
Oliver?
So we're Odyssey, and we are an AI lab that works on world models. And this is a type of AI that is trained to understand and simulate the world. And we believe this is going to be a foundational technology that revolutionizes robotics or education or gaming, driverless cars, drones, all of these virtual and physical systems. We believe this new intelligence will be able to power.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited to have you all here. So coming back to Anush, all right, Anush, you came from the outside in. What is the most common concern or resistance you hear from customers about ROCm, and what is AMD doing to address that?
Yeah, I think early on there was like when I joined AMD, I think Nod.ai had more support for more AMD hardware than ROCm had, and so the perception and the reality was ROCm was needed help, and so over the past 3 years we've kind of like got it through the paces. As of the last release, we are now on a 6 weeks cadence. This is similar to what we did with Chrome and Chrome OS years ago. So we're shipping software like a software company, and so now it's a lagging indicator in some cases where some people may still be talking about like CUDA and CUDA portability, and that's okay, because that's there's investments made there that we provide tooling like Hipify, but now with Claude and Codex, it literally is like an overnight job, and if something doesn't happen overnight, like we are there to help you. So the between perception and also the tooling that we've been able to like rely on with agentic AI, it has really shifted the narrative where it's just now about how fast can we go and get to the outcomes of like like Ideogram was launching something, right? Like we were just like, okay, we had to optimize so many queries per second, what are we doing, and get to the final outcome. So I think we've made a good journey, and now with ROCm.ai, we're taking the last barrier out when we want ROCm to be controlled more naturally, right? It should be like, hey, deploy Ideogram's 4.0 model on an MI355, and you should be able to like get capacity automatically. You should be able to deploy it, figure out how many queries per second you want to deploy it at, and it should all be done just using the TUI interface. So we're trying to not just stop at like parity, we want to make it delightful to use AMD software.
Just so you know, his KPIs that he gives his team, he literally told them the goal is to have an SLA where they give me what I'm asking for within 24 hours. That's how they're being measured. So I'm pretty demanding.
Them and their agents. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, Oliver, I have a question for you. So, tell us a little bit about, like you talked about the use cases that you can enable with your technology. So tell us a little bit about how what you're doing differs and unlocks new benefits that LLMs can't, and what specifically of all those broad use cases excites you the most about what your world models can do.
Yes. So my background before this company was in driverless cars. And what it turned out to be is that to unlock a driverless car, you needed to teach a model how to predict the world. You're a car, you've got cameras, you've got pedestrians and cars everywhere. Can you predict where they're going to be in 5 or 10 seconds time? we as humans do this all the time, right? When we're driving, we have this capability, and now machines needed that capability too. And so it turned out to solve that, we simply needed to advance artificial intelligence. You needed to be able to throw more data at this problem, more parameters, more compute. And then all of a sudden, in sort of late 2010s, these models became superhuman at predicting where that pedestrian, where that car was going to be next. And so really, that was all learned from just lots of visual observations of the world. The model learned that humans move like this, cars drive like that, and it learned it from, again, just visual observations. And so that was incredible to me, the idea that you could effectively train a model to predict the future. Wow. And so in world models today, these are much more mature versions of that technology and much more general, diverse versions of that technology too. They learn from a much less narrow data domain than they did in driverless cars. And so really what these models are learning today is the world over time. You have lots of video of the world, and over the course of, let's say, 20, 30 seconds of video, what's unfolding over those 20, 30 seconds? What are humans doing? What's the world doing? What are physics doing? All those sorts of things. And so then it learns those behaviors. And it does that, again, just through watching lots of visual observations. My belief is that this is closer to how humans' intelligence has emerged, right? We watch the world, we look at our parents, are they happy, are they sad? We bump into the wall, we fall over, we feel something, we learn not to do something. And I think that maybe the best analogy is if you were to not know how to swim, how would you go about learning to do that? Would you read a book that describes how to swim? Or would you watch other people do it, or just jump in the water and experience it? Mm. And so my belief is language models will have tons of applications. It's going to be a super intelligent, it's going to be incredible, but there's just certain applications, maybe in the physical world, but also in virtual worlds where world models will just be more adept at those tasks.
Amazing. All right, Mohammed, so text rendering in images is something that's been an industry-wide challenge, but you seem to have differentiated and set yourself apart from the others. So what exactly is it that sets Ideogram apart from others that have tried to do the same?
Yeah, in general, it's focusing on the business use cases of image generation and editing, right? Graphic design is the biggest use case, and you look at billboards, you go in a city, you see a lot of storefronts, and they all have text as part of them. And it's not only text, it comes in different fonts and styles and different languages. And if you think of, again, graphic design, there's an element of art and culture. You know, when a company goes overseas and tries to present the same story, it has to be in a different shape and form. And in order for an AI model to understand that, you need to really get to the nuances of art and culture. And ultimately, you want to partner with different regions and build models that understand communication in those regions and are able to help with the marketing and advertising in those regions. So it started with text rendering, but if you think of the creative industry as a whole, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and we still haven't seen the inflection point with coding that happened with coding in marketing and design. It's going to be personalized, and it's going to be very creative, and we're going to hopefully see that in the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you mentioned, it's only just starting. And so from the GPU landscape, that's the demand is, you know, everyone's like, is it a bubble? And you look at what the potential is and you know it's not. So that actually brings me to the next question for you,
We
Anj.
get more capacity.
Yeah, well, so that's why, you know, I think, Anj, I'd like to understand from you. You work with companies like we have on stage today a lot. You've started companies yourself. What do you think has to change about how infrastructure is provided to sort of have a healthy ecosystem for these labs outside? I mean, as much as we love the big ones that are on stage with us and drive a tremendous amount of demand, we all want to enable the innovation that comes from a lot of the other startups and the research that you guys are all doing. So what do you think has to change to make this
Oh boy, where do we start?
scalable?
You know, I think the single most important thing that I wish all of us as a space were doing more of is output maxing instead of indexing on inputs. I think often we get caught up in, especially in new technologies, we talk about inputs, not outputs. And and the human brain just naturally tends to anchor on what is easily measurable. And so we spend so much time talking about how much capacity we are training the models on, or the size of the models. But really what matters is, are we putting out state-of-the-art capabilities? And how efficiently are we doing that? So as an example, Mohammed, his work at Google before he started Ideogram was on the Imagen family of models. It was extraordinarily efficient. And that ended up changing, how consumers could create these interactive. In the case of Ideogram, I think there was, I think your first release was just in text-to-image generation capability, and then you added sort of editing. I remember that was a huge deal. Just being able to edit images in a way that was natural and fast was this new capability. And I think if we measured as a space, what is the output we're producing and how efficiently are we doing it, what we'll realize is actually there's just a lot more compute. We could get a lot more out of the existing compute we have. So utilization would go up. We'd start measuring, the quality of the tokens more, which is the output. And I just think the reality is that it's nobody's fault. We're just so early that evaluation of tokens is so early. But the faster I find teams start asking, well, what is the right measure of the tokens we're trying to produce? And then how much does it cost us to do that? And are we doing it in an efficient way before we start scaling? Those teams are able to actually make extraordinary progress really fast. And Anthropic is a great example of this. When Anthropic was founded, it was about 6 months after GPT-3. And it's hard to imagine now Anthropic as an underdog, but it was a really scary time. OpenAI.
I remember.
You remember this? It's not that long.
ChatGPT came out, right?
So this was prior to ChatGPT.
I know, but when ChatGPT came out.
Yes, it was a very daunting time for the company, because by then OpenAI had raised about $10 billion, and the team at Anthropic was less than 20, and it was really, really challenging. But the answer was, how do we output max with efficiency, right? There's this notion of compute multipliers on these research teams, which is just based on algorithmic innovation, how much more, how many more units of intelligence can we get per unit of input compute? And I think in the early days, the CMs at Anthropic were about 6x or so, which meant for every dollar, that OpenAI was deploying, or I don't even know what the compute multiplier was relative to Google. It was probably 10 or 20x or something like that. These larger companies are just not that efficient. And so as a startup, you have this very amazing advantage where you're small, you're focused, you're talent dense, and you can measure, if you measure the right things, Anthropic is a proof point that you can scale really, really fast at the right time. And so I think efficiency is just underrated in the space. And scale, we're in the scaling era, right? The bitter lesson is holding. The more compute you throw at these models, the more the performance does improve. But if you scale prematurely, you end up wasting a lot of compute. So I generally am finding, I spend a lot of my time with the labs we are investors in or co-owners of, trying to put in place the right evals.
Yeah.
And then focusing on what is the state-of-the-art capability, what frontier do we actually want to own, and then how many units, what are our compute multipliers, or any other ways we can get efficient outputs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Actually, I was on a podcast just a few weeks ago when we were at the Raise Summit, and the moderator kept saying to me, don't you just want to sell more GPUs? Don't you want to? And it's well, no, because we want to enable new use cases, and
right.
Fundamentally, we're going to be compute limited. I think for us, we are more vested in getting the most out of the GPUs, and it's not always the latest and greatest even.
Right.
A lot of the older generation GPUs, people are finding out of necessity now that, oh wait, I actually didn't even need to move on. And so I think even AMD, from AMD's perspective, we really want to enable efficiency, and we want people to get the most out of our hardware so that we can together as a society innovate and make the most of this moment. It would suck to be GPU and power limited, you know?
You know, what's extraordinary is net flops utilization is just, nobody discusses it. But of average single tenant cluster, something like 80+% of net flops are just wasted. And so as a team, you often, but it's hard to invest as a small team in infrastructure, because what do you focus on doing research, or do you focus on
maximizing usage?
Maximizing usage. Well, that's where calling AMD really helps, right? I think there was one of our labs like 2 weeks ago, you know what I'm talking about, that has like 3 inference engineers internally, but within 24 hours, you guys had done a port of their stack and had figured out how to get their optimization, them to be much more, to get much more flops utilization than they could on their own. And so I think what we need to do is decouple innovation scaling from infra scaling. These are just 2 very different challenges. And I think having teams like AMD, where you have all these extraordinary forward deployed engineers you guys provide to developers has been amazing in unblocking the bottleneck for these research teams that are great.
Well, that team you refer to is actually part of Anush's team. And so I actually tried to pull him in, and he delegated, and they hit it out of the park. So I guess I'll go to you, Anush, and say, what do we have to get right at AMD over the next 12 months to enable this?
Yeah, I think the forward deployed engineering, just the Palantir example was a good one. But what we're trying to kind of bring that in and make sure it touches not just like performance, which is what initially we led with, right? Because there was like performance deployability, but now we want to make sure it's like end-to-end utilization and like the outcomes, as you mentioned, right? So we want our FDE teams to be focused on end customer outcomes.
Right.
And if we aim for the outcomes, then in between there may be like performance of the thing, there may be availability, there may be deployability, there may be auto scaling, and we're staffing for each of those areas. And the way we staff it is we think of forward deployed engineering as like the backward pass. So the SDEs are the forward pass. The skill sets are the same. They are solid engineers. Software, the SDEs like work to a PRD, they build out. FDEs are the backward pass, start from the customer and work backwards, but they're all committing to the same code repository, so we can like run a tight ship in terms of our engineering execution, but then we have solid customer focus to make sure that that works. And then on the technology side, we're also trying to make sure we invest heavily in things that we in the past may have just inherited and we would have assumed is outside the realm of what AMD would have done, right? Now we want to pull that in. For example, Slurm is an example, right? Or Kubernetes, like Slurm, we were partnering and trying to get enough support, and then we were like, okay, it's time to just rewrite it, and we have Spur. It's fully written in Rust, and it has like 10x more test cases of all of that, and we can, we don't need like 4 different ways to like get the customer through. And the engineering team will support you end to end, right? And make sure it's like robust for an AI native use case and deployability. And so it gives you fungibility of training and inference in a grid-like thing, right? Where you're measuring it, where you want to train and serve. So we're thinking of it from a technology standpoint too, not just on the engineering and FDE side. But yeah, those are kind of the areas that we're focused on to make sure we can help.
Awesome. All right, Oliver, so I hear your CTO recently said that our software stack significantly improved, thanks to Anush and team.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about what you think has improved and where we need to focus, where you think we need to focus over the next little bit to continue that momentum?
Well, I think we were discussing just before that there was debate a year or two ago about CUDA being this insurmountable thing, and now that is not the case. And so in terms of that being the primary blocker, it isn't anymore. And so that's exciting. Yeah, generally I think just simply scale of compute. If you'd have asked me 3, maybe 6 months ago about availability of compute, I'd have said it's very difficult, but there are still pockets out there. And then today, and maybe starting 3 months ago, I think those pockets started disappearing. And it's getting increasingly difficult today, and I think it will get increasingly difficult in future. And so I think the barriers to adoption are now very low. and now it's simply availability of chips.
All right, well, I can help with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's where I shine. Yeah. All right, I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about open source. I'm going to be coming to you, Ansh, so start thinking. So, for AMD, we've been open source from the beginning. It's been just a key tenet of our foundation of everything. Whether it's hardware or software, we're heavily vested. The logic there was that we believe that, innovation can just happen at a greater pace when we do that. And so it's always been a big part of our plan. Now, an added bonus for us has been in this agentic world, having open source software has happened to just make life easier, actually. So that's been just a bonus. I know you're passionate, Anj, about open source. That's, I think, one of our first conversations. We talked about that. Can you tell me why you think open source software is important to this ecosystem and sort of what your thoughts on that are? Pivot if you don't want to answer that. Yeah.
No, it's so crazy to be asked that because it's like, it underpins everything we do in the tech industry, today already. So it's so crazy to me that these debates, I feel like I've been having the same debate for like 4 years now, but it's happening at like higher and higher, I guess, stakes. And 4 or 5 years ago, it was not, I think we had this conversation too a long time ago that if you believe that, machine learning just works as a technology, like eventually you get to a place where it starts becoming just software. Software ate the world, so to speak, to borrow from my former partner Mark, and AI is just eating software. And so then it follows the shape of the arc of and the arc of the technology. I think will be quite similar in many ways. And here, let me explain what I mean by that. If you look at operating systems, for example, we first had to have net new capabilities show up. Like we had to have Windows, and after a certain stage of maturity of the operating system stack, then Linux came in and said, let's just standardize these capabilities in the operating system, and people who want to customize those capabilities for their needs, this is for you. And then the world bifurcated into consumers who use closed operating systems like Apple, iOS, or in the desktop world, you have Microsoft, and you have Linux, and you have businesses like Red Hat that provide the standardized operating system to mission-critical customers. Like the world's largest governments, who are often the largest enterprise customers in the world, all use Linux. It's like managed Linux and various flavors of it, but at the end of the day, like their needs cannot be met fundamentally by closed source. Like if you're a CIO or CTO of a bank or a military agency, you cannot afford to be single vendor dependent. And so you'll prototype with closed source software, but eventually, when it comes to procurement at scale, you're going to say, what happens if Anthropic, OpenAI, any other closed source thing goes out of business? We need backup options. And so there will always be demand for both closed and open. And it's not an either or debate. These are just different business models and are extraordinarily valuable. Red Hat is a multi-billion-dollar business today. And I think we're just in such an early part of the industry where we've barely figured out how to use Claude to code, right? That people going, open models there's just no way they're going to be able to catch up. I find is zero-sum thinking it doesn't make sense to me. I think there's extraordinary innovation to do in open architectures. I do think it'd be nice to have some like frontier labs in the US and the Western hemisphere that were putting out state-of-the-art open model capabilities, not just China. Because unfortunately, when the politicians get involved, lots of decisions get made that are not really tied to technical decisions. And that's what's happening. The geopolitics is getting in the way of fundamentally what should be sort of a scientific and an engineering-driven approach. But this happened with the internet. There are two internets. There's the Chinese internet and there's everybody else. That unfortunately is the way AI will go. And it's very clear why they're racing ahead on open. It's because they are so good at centralized planning. They go like, we need language models at the frontier. I don't care how you do it, but the party says, get together and do it, do co-design all the way on Huawei. And within 2-3 years, they're putting out I don't have concrete evidence that they're doing distillation at the scale that some of the claims there are being made, but it's not, I don't think it's an unreasonable reality. And so I think there's so much pent-up demand in the enterprise for open, like a stable, reliable, consistent family of open models across text, across image, video, world models, across every modality. And I think there's multiple, like $100+ billion companies to be built doing that. And the ecosystem is barely getting started. I know it's apparently gotten controversial to say that, the open frontier is a thing, but I don't, there's no way we will not have multiple large open model-based companies that are yet to be started.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Yeah,
I'm happy to be challenged.
I agree. I think I'll split it into two things. There's open for software itself, independent of the AI open weights thing. Software itself, like when we were doing Nord.ai, our business model was like everything's open, all our source code is outside, and even talking to VCs, they were like, wait, but what would you do? Like if you put all of what you do and you have, how are you going to make money? And I think, and I had the earlier version of speed is the moat then, which is like, you just have to execute faster. It's like if you're open and you can move the ball forward, then you are, by de facto, they want you because the industry is moving so fast, so you can move faster with an open ecosystem and open source. And I think that kind of like carries to open weights too, right? So if you do it with open weights and everyone wants to, like the barrier to entry, the barrier to try it is like, there is no incentive for you to like get a subscription from me to go check my capability out. You can try it.
Right.
Your engineers can try it. Everyone, it like soaks up like layer by layer. And then when you come to the click, they're like, okay, who do I go to for this model? You're the guy who's building it.
Yeah, exactly. The credibility is there already.
And you're obviously the person I'm going to pay for, services or any value-add solutions on top of it, or business outcomes built on top of these models. And that's where, I think there's, like you said, there's like huge opportunities to build billion-dollar companies or trillion-dollar companies on top of building that and built on an open foundation, because then it brings everyone in at no cost.
Yes.
And it's not like you have to commit to something or someone when you come into that, ecosystem. But then the unlock is where, everyone can like add value and you pay for that value. That's fine.
Yes.
And if I may add, the ecosystem is the key word here, right?
Right, yeah.
And we have an example of something we're going to launch next week, which is we initially put our model, the latest model, as open weight, and that led us to partner with various model serving companies to work with us in a tight partnership, and they can help serve many more customers than our capacity allows us to do so. And then another company that specializes in making models very efficient took our model and did their own analysis and made it much faster without losing the quality. But they came back to us to discuss how we can collaborate to push the quality even further. And we're going to co-launch a model next week that's going to be much more efficient than the initial model we released a month ago. And this wouldn't have been possible for us as a nimble startup to do, because we need to work on the next model capability and the next model launch, and we just didn't have enough manpower to focus on the efficiency. But them having done that in partnership with the inference providers allows us to build a very defensible ecosystem that can provide an alternative solution to much bigger companies.
That's awesome. That's the innovation that we're hoping open source drives.
Exactly, and at the end of the day, to Anush's point, the model is not the only artifact. It's the engine that can create models, and releasing an open weight model kind of pushes you to work harder and smarter and kind of push the capabilities faster forward, as opposed to thinking too much about building a closed ecosystem around your older model. You kind of keep pushing the engine and make it more efficient so that you can put even better models forward.
Yeah, this point is underexplored. I think an important observation that we found in customers and customer adoption across our portfolio is that most customers actually don't care what the underlying model is. They care about the capability. And so they don't really care if it was a jointly trained model between Ideogram and another partner. That what matters is the eval, right? Does the output tokens do what they need them to do? And it could be a system of models, it could be jointly trained models, but underneath the hood, to them that's an implementation detail, especially in the enterprise.
Yeah.
And so there's so much within the ecosystem, I think there's a lot of opportunities, especially for those of you here who might not be, it can sometimes seem, the industry can sometimes seem inaccessible if you don't have a PhD in AI or whatever, but I don't think that's actually true, because especially with open models, if you pick them up and you have an industry you really understand, and you understand the decision maker, you can post-train with a lot of tooling that exists out there that's open, including some of the tooling that AMD's put out, on top of somebody else's model, and then create tokens or a system, a product, a solution, whatever it might be, that the enterprise ultimately is going, that's valuable to me. I don't really care what the underlying model even is. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's this, the post-training stack, the RL loop on top of base weights is extraordinarily fertile ground for innovation. And I think most developers who will get early in and start getting their hands dirty with that part of the stack will build billion, if not trillion-dollar companies over the next few, at least very clear to me that that's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah. Oliver, we're going to come up to the end of the time, so I wanted to give you a chance. Is there anything you wanted to add, or is there something we didn't talk about that maybe you wanted to leave the audience with?
Nothing to add. To leave the audience with. Put me on the spot. Yeah. I think when we look at the systems we have today, we go outside, we have driverless cars, we walk into a few offices in San Francisco, you'll see some humanoids walking around.
It's crazy here.
You go into any office and every engineer and researcher's got like 20 agents working on their behalf doing crazy things. It's easy to think we're in this very special time, but and of course we are, but fast forward 5 years, 10 years, the world as we live it will be dramatically different, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, we're excited too, and I'm really excited that you all joined us here, especially you guys on stage. Thank you so much for doing that. But also, I find for the AMD ecosystem, it helps to see that you're not alone, that meet other people who are doing things and bounce ideas and really build on it, because that is what we are all about culturally at AMD, and we're hoping to foster that with these sorts of conversations. So I know my time is up, and so probably the people in the back are freaking out, but I do want to leave with one thing from you, Anush. When you joined AMD, what is it you think you knew that you brought in that we didn't already know? Because I got to tell you, as someone who works alongside you, things have changed for us in the last few years since you joined. So what is it that we didn't know that you were able to bring in that's actually helped us make this transition and accelerate adoption at AMD?
I wouldn't take too much credit for that, but I would say...
he's the face of it.
No.
Yeah, he's the face of it, but there is a massive team behind
I think
him. Yeah.
the team is, and I mentioned this in our all hands and in the broader AMD teams, right? We are a 57-year-old startup, and I tell the team to operate like that. So even though it's like 2,500 engineers, we get them in the room and say, hey, you should know what you should be doing, and let's go operate, and do what you should do, and then over-communicate. And so that unlock, I think, has happened now. And so we are like super motivated to get the job done. And that's very fulfilling. When Nod was acquired, Lisa was like, Anush, come run AMD like you run Nod, was what she said. Think of it as like Nod is acquiring AMD, not AMD is acquiring Nod. And to this day, I still feel like the same way I felt 2.5 years ago when I joined AMD. And I'll just leave with like, I think the future of AI is it'll be an ecosystem effort, right? And it'll be a partnership. So come join us, and if there's anything that as a customer or a developer that doesn't work, tag me. And of course I have our team to help, but we want to make sure the experience is delightful and lift all boats as we go on this journey.
Thank you. We appreciate every one of you on this stage immensely. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.